Welcome back to another episode of crafting and reviewing. And today we'll be gardening and tortoise watching. My tortoise Petey will be involved just a little bit in the beginning of this video. So today we will be reviewing the new Netflix show Jupiter's Legacy, which is actually based on a graphic art novel by Mark Miller and Frank Quietly, with the same title, Jupiter's Legacy. I'm not going to list everybody's name on here, just a couple of the key ones. We got Josh Duhamel and Ben Daniels, Leslie Bibb, Andrew Horton, Elena Kaporas, Mike Wade, and Matt Lantern as mainly starring and as recurring characters in this show. So let's dive in. Jupiter's Legacy follows the events of superhero type-esque people as they save the world from rogue comets, as they save the world from rogue comets, bad guys with supervillain powers, bank robberies, all kinds of bad stuff you just don't want happening in your town or world. Our main superheroes are Utopian, Blue Bolt, um, the Flare, Firefox, and Lady Liberty. As it turns out, in present day, we have Lady Liberty married to the Utopian. They're also known as Grace and Sheldon Sampson. And the cool thing about this show is that they have a past and a present, which is both playing kind of in real time. It's not that it reflects to the past through just one or two episodes. It actually cuts halfway to the past through every single episode, which I found was really unique and cool. So it starts off with present day as we find, you know, Sheldon, who's the utopian. He's kind of like the Superman-esque person of the world, and he's teaching his kids, Brandon and Chloe, kind of a valuable lesson about using your powers against humans, how it's wrong. And then we find out, as he's taking them for ice cream after scolding them, that he's called away from this, something bad happening in the world that he can hear, and he leaves. And it kind of sets the stage and the tone for the relationship between parents and children. That, him being the utopian, having all this weight of the world and all the bad guys and fighting for justice and the code is just overshadowing his role as a parent. And we find that whole, dynamic impacts both Chloe and Brandon negatively as they enter adulthood. They're coming into their 20s, and we have Chloe, who is um, very much in the same powers of her mother, but she wants nothing to do with the union. She wants nothing to do with anything. She just wants to model, and she's kind of the black sheep of the family, and she's always under the influence. And then on the other hand, we have Brandon, who is trying to follow in his father's footsteps, do everything he's told, try his absolute best, trying to still win approval from his father. And it's kind of sad because in the beginning, he's trying so hard and he ends up overhearing his dad saying that, oh, you'll never be good enough, he'll never measure up, and maybe he never will. So he's kind of inner battling that. On top of that, in our present day, we know that there are these certain amount of superheroes, the chosen ones, per se, but we're missing two right off the bat. We're missing Skyfox, who is also known as George, who is Sheldon, the Utopian's best friend. And we're missing Blue Bolt, who isn't really talked about too much in this right just yet. But both of them are missing and clearly not present in this present time. We kind of open up to, these superheroes trying to do their absolute best to keep the world in order. And as that's going on, there's this great big alarm going off that in the superhero jail, the Supermax, that this super big villain is, he's broken out. He's causing havoc, and everybody needs to go pronto to go get this guy. And he's not really much of a guy either. He looks like a mix between a melted gray Hulk. He's super strong. He's got kind of like this Iron Man like thing on his chest that's like powering him, and he ends up killing two of the younger superheroes and pinning the Utopian down and hurting Lady Liberty really bad. And Brainwave, who is the Utopian's brother, is trying to get into his brain and shut Blackstar down, but he just can't seem to do it. He gets in for like a second, and then Blackstar is able to grab him through that mental leak and throw him, which totally stumps Brainwave. He's never had that happen before. And it gets to the point where, there's no way out. The Utopian's pinned, Lady Liberty's hurt, and it looks like this black star is going to go into supernova and explode and end all these superheroes. So at the very last second, before the clock times out, Brandon jumps up and does like a super giant punch and pretty much, wipes out Black Star's brain into oblivion and, you know, taps him out of the game, saving everybody. And at that moment in that part, you're just like, yay, he did it right on, he could do it. But it's crazy because right then the Utopian pops up and starts yelling at Brandon saying, "You broke the code, you're not standing for what our values are, and I can't trust you, and you took a life," and and pretty much sentence him to go be on this farm, their family farm. He's not allowed to go out. He's not allowed to help on superhero missions anymore. He's just like pretty much right off the bat of the show told to stay out of the game. And Brandon's just like really conflicted. His whole arc, his whole character is trying to live up and walk in his dad's shoes, prove he's worthy of love from his father. And he gets put with this choice between save his father, his mother, his friends, his colleagues, everybody, or let this black star live and lose everybody he knows, making him the only superhero. So of course he chose his family. I think anybody would. And so the Utopian just can't seem to deal with that. He ends up going to like a psychologist to kind of deal with that. And all the other superheroes are kind of, they're on the fence about this code. They're all supposed to come together for this code, which is, never kill, never harm any humans. Any supervillains that are out there that are causing havoc, they need to be trialed, face justice the legal way. So, pretty much around, so kind of right around where all that bad energy is flowing, we're thrown back into the past. It's 1929, and we have a young Brainwave, who is Walter, and a young Sheldon, who is the Utopian. They're not Brainwave or the Utopian yet, and they look all snazzy in this 1920s getup, and they're having a conversation with their elderly father, who runs a steel plant. And it's right before the Great Depression and everything. Nobody knows that's going to happen, and they're talking about an expansion. And Sheldon and his father are like, "Yes, let's do an expansion. We gotta keep going. We gotta push hard. We're doing so good this year." And for some reason, Walter, who is the older brother, is he doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want to do. He keeps saying, "No, no, you guys, just wait a couple months." And it's not really clear why he doesn't want to do it. And they're just kind of treating him like not like a business colleague or anything. They're treating him like a party pooper. And his dad makes this great speech about, he's got to expand, it's time to do it. And so it's their father's company, and he just does it anyway. Well, lo and behold, the Great Recession happens, the run for the banks, everybody's maxed out, everybody's losing, and the whole of the thing is in jeopardy. Sheldon, finds out about this as he's meeting George, who's later becomes Skyfox. George and Sheldon are best friends. and they both, say hi but then separate, and Sheldon runs back to the office and finds Walt just like, very stressed out with all of the, the company around him, gathering papers. And he just said, "What do you think is happening? I told you not to expand. I told you. This is the wrong time to expand." And so, Sheldon's like, "Well, where's Dad? Where is he? I got to talk to him." And Walter said he wanted to go up to the roof to get some air. So Sheldon goes up there and he finds his dad up there. His dad's just looking pretty relaxed considering all of his whole company is melting around him. And he tells Sheldon about how he sold steel for the man down the, a couple blocks down to build his box company where he could put everything in a box. And then now with this recession and everything that, he's going to be put into a box and just all ends up in a box one day. And he's just kind of cryptic about it. And Sheldon's like, "Okay, well, everybody needs you downstairs, Dad. Let's just go downstairs and try to help Walter with this. It's hectic. We need you." And so his dad's like, "Yeah, I'll be right down." And so Sheldon's like, "Okay." And he turns around and makes like 2, 3, 4 steps towards the door. And pretty much his father gets on the ledge and meets him down there a lot faster than he thought. And poor Sheldon saw all of that and it's just, you know, crushed. Then after that, we get thrown back, or we're thrown forward, I'm sorry, into the present. And so the utopian Sheldon nowadays is really upset that Brandon violated the strict moral code. And so Sheldon attempts to convince the younger superheroes and the public that his code is still relevant in this kind of mass press thing on the Union Steps or wherever they are, City Hall building. And he's pretty much told by a reporter that 78% of Americans feel like the superheroes should abandon the code and kill these supervillains so they stop killing all the people and their heroes. And, you know, Black Star supposedly the whole reason he was in Supermax was because he had killed a supervillain. And Black Star has supporters that support him and support what his movement is against Sheldon and the Union because because they hold their values over the people's lives, or that's just what 78% of them feel like. So Sheldon's kind of reeling from this news. He feels at a place. They've been doing this superhero gig now for many, many decades. And even though their hair is all gray now, they've barely aged, any of them. And so he just feels really conflicted. The moral values he's, stood up for, the code, everything, has been kind of his steel beam through all of this. And now it's kind of crumbling around him with Black Star's supporters shouting for justice at this town hall, and then his own son Brandon ended up killing Black Star. Well, the first twist gets thrown in, and it finds out that Black Star is not dead. He was in Supermax the entire time and never escaped. The Black Star that Brandon killed was actually a clone of Black Star. So that's crazy. And then there's kind of this buzz around all the superheroes as to what, who could have made this clone? Where did it come from? So then we get thrown back into the past. And unfortunately, as Walter and Sheldon are grieving their dad, on the front page of the newspaper is a picture of their dad all splat out on the concrete. And it pretty much accuses him of using his steel workers' pension funds to expand his steel company. And it just pretty much says that he committed suicide instead of facing the backlash that he would receive from doing this poor, terrible choice with his workers' money. And so Sheldon's he's grieving. He's very upset. He goes to the newspaper uh, place. He goes to the newspaper publisher's place and finds the reporter Grace Kennedy, who had made up, this news article, and chews her out, chews everybody else out. Is really upset, and she just says, "Well, I'm really sorry that that's your dad, but I checked my facts back and forth, and they're correct." And he pretty much says that, how dare they say that his father was an embezzler who stole from employees, and that, that he'll be back with a lawyer. And when Sheldon leaves, storms out of that office, he returns back to Walter. And Walter said, well, while you were storming down to the newspaper looking like an idiot, I ran the numbers, I called the bank, I checked back and forth, I checked it twice, but it's actually true. Our father had used the pension funds from the steelworkers to expand, and there's nothing we can do. And so Sheldon and Walter are just, not only are they gonna lose their business for sure because of this depression and this just, running in the banks, but now they have nothing to give to their employees who have been paying into this pension fund to be a safety net for old age and everything. So they go to their father's funeral, and at their father's funeral, Sheldon is just struck by this, seizure. And as he's going through this seizure, blood's coming out of his nose, he's on the ground, and he starts seeing these crazy flashes of this mysterious island, and, doesn't know what it means, and then blacks out. He is then hospitalized again by these haunting visions until he is released back home. We jump forward to the present again, and we're introduced to the next kind of sub characters that we have, who turn out, one of them turns out to be a main character, but anyway, this gang of thieves is indebted to this supervillain called the Big Man. He's this really big man that glows when he's upset. Yeah, okay. And they have to perform these series of heists to get enough money. And in a drunken stupor, Chloe, who is the daughter of the Utopian and Lady Liberty, ends up accidentally stopping with their robberies by wandering into the middle of the road. And they smash their van into her. And I just want to add, this van's so cool. They had to turn on the windshield wipers and pump the cigarette lighter 3 times, and they flash through a building and then right into her. So the thieves don't know that, she's not in on it. They just see, oh my gosh, it's Chloe Sampson, the daughter of the Utopian and Lady Liberty. She's here to stop us. So they start attacking her. She's super out of it and kind of low key attacks them back, but she's not all the way online. They end up not able to complete their mission and get out of there. And Chloe ends up finding the suitcase that they were trying to steal filled with this mysterious glittery bag of glitter. And so the thieves' leader, Hutch, then kills the big man to save himself and uses the big man's resources to retrieve a powerful weapon from a certain German doctor that probably is part of the terribleness that happened in 1944. So, or actually a little before that. But anyway, that whole timeline, I'm not going to say it, but you know what I'm saying. He's a bad guy. So he gets this powerful weapon, and he's pretty much told that it could blow a hole through the most powerful being in the entire planet. And Hutch, who is the leader of the thieves, seems pretty pleased with this and goes into this mysterious room where there's this it almost looks like a time traveler's carriage, because there's a seat and there's all these weird buttons and all these cool things. So that's interesting. And just as we're kind of asking, well, what's going on with that, we're thrown back into the past. It's after the funeral now, and Sheldon's family and his fiance are really, really concerned about him because he seems to be really out of it. He's talking to himself, he's staying up in his room. Sheldon, who never draws, is now drawing these mysterious, weird maps and pictures and spheres. And Sheldon's best friend, George Hutchins, decides to, go see him and try to be a moral support after he's asked by Walter to go visit him. So George goes on there and tries to talk with Sheldon, and Sheldon pretty much tells him to go away, leave him alone. And right before he kind of went in there to go talk with Sheldon, she noticed that Sheldon was talking to himself through the door. And George, tells him, There's nothing to worry about. There's nothing beyond death. It's just it. It's all that happens, you know. And George actually tells Sheldon this really sad story about how when George was a little boy, he had his mother, and his mother got very, very sick. And when she found out she was sick, she actually went into her room. She went into her room and was attended by servants and wouldn't allow George into the room for fear that he would also get sick. And he never even got to say goodbye to her, even towards the end. So he has this, like, you know, carefree attitude about everything, even though we find out that the world's pretty much falling apart on him because, you know, he's still kind of grieving from his mom and he doesn't know how to, you know, heal from that. And so he pretty much tells Sheldon all this. And when he looks up, Sheldon's asleep, who had been up for days and days and days. And so George, you know, kind of pats him on the knee, gets up, and then as he's walking by, he notices, you know, these weird drawings on the table that Sheldon had been drawing. And so George ends up taking one of the drawings that Sheldon had ripped up and puts it in his glove pocket and leaves. And to make matters really creepy, we find out that Sheldon, who was talking to himself, is actually not talking to himself. He's talking to his father, whose face is half missing. And his father's really, really mean and says a bunch of mean things about him, about his friends and everything, to the point where he's like screaming at Sheldon. And Sheldon's just like, like, you know, can't get away from it, can't sleep or anything. So the words from George really kind of took him away from his father for just a minute and he was able to. So then we're thrown forward back into the present. Chloe, who is pretty much downward spiraling out of control. She's got a crazy drug habit. She's really toxic towards her friends who are acting really fake towards her. We kind of see a little bit why she's so, you know, just tough shelled against the world. She ends up finding this guy who seems like he's really into her, only to find out that, no, he just wants her to put in a good word with her father. He didn't even really care about her at all. And, you know, it's just like you kind of have to get a little window inside her life. Like, how many people have tried to get closer to her, be friends with her, you know, be lovers with her, only to just want something out of her because she is the utopian and Lady Liberty's daughter. So I think she makes herself as unappealing and, you know, spiky as possible because then it's kind of like her safeguard for anybody that wants to get through, even after all that, might be a real person. Which so far nobody other than her mother and her brother Brandon. So she goes to her last endorsement and she's pretty much told what to do by this like producer lady who's a little too forward with her and makes jokes about her, you know, her drug habit. And Chloe, who's just not having it all, ends up throwing this really expensive car, you know, as kind of like a screw you, and gets fired from her very last endorsement job. And then on top of that, she goes to kind of, you know, deal with that. She goes to this party and sees her other friends from the union who then publicly shame her because she wasn't there to help fight Black Star. And as a result, they actually blame her for the death of a couple of them that had died during this giant battle with the fake Black Star. So, you know, she has to deal with that really bad suffering, even though she didn't have anything to do with that. Then we're thrown back into the past. Sheldon then abandons his fiancee Jane to kind of follow his vision. Says he has to go somewhere. You know, he can't be stopped. He kind of snapped out of it for like a minute, you know, and seemed his normal self until George kind of reappeared and said, "Hey, Sheldon, like this map that you made here is really crazy." And I guess the way that George had put it back together, how it was ripped, he put it back together in a sort of different way, that it became very clear to Sheldon what it was, and it brought him right back to the psychosis, seeing his father and the seizures and everything. And he pretty much tells Sheldon pretty much tells his fiancee Jane, I gotta go deal with this." And it leads him to a small town in Kansas ravaged by the depression. Everybody's everywhere. There's food lines. It's not good. And so Sheldon ends up, looking for this windmill with three missing blades and finally finds it after most of the episode looking and runs into Old Man Miller, who is Red Foreman. Anyway, he totally is, though. And he finds out that Old Man Miller is actually suffering from extremely similar visions with someone close to him dying and the psychosis and these maps and these coordinates and everything going on. And Sheldon's like really into what he's talking about, but realizes that Old Man Miller is just crazy. And he keeps talking about going into the water and this storm that just keeps following him no matter what. And it seemed to change directions everywhere he went. And it was just crazy. And right as, Old Man Miller's kind of wrapping up the story, he warns Sheldon not to follow the advice given by dead loved ones in his visions and then kills himself, which is pretty crazy. So Sheldon then, you know, finds this hatch in the bottom of the floor, moves Old Man Miller aside, opens the hatch up to find Old Man Miller's whole family um, mummified, still sitting around a table underneath the hatch, all dead. So as Sheldon is down there with Old Man Miller's entire family, he gets this crazy vision. So instead of all of Old Man Miller's dead family members down there, it actually turns into people he knows who are alive in this vision that he has. And it's him and Walter, his brother, George, his best friend, Grace, the newspaper lady that wrote that terrible article about his father that turned out to be true, Fitz, a worker of the steel plant that he had to lay off without pension, and another guy who was never seen before. And so he's just so animate to George and his brother that they finally relent and give in to go visit this island in 1933. He gets Grace and Fitz to go along by offering them money and a chance at a good story and a chance at a good income to Fitz and his family who have been, left without income during this hard time and because of Sheldon and Walter's father's terrible choice in using the pension fund. So they venture off into this island without the last member because Sheldon is convinced that he will show up eventually. Then we're thrown back to the future. Sheldon starts to experience doubts about approaching and enforcing his code. We also see that Lady Liberty, who is Grace, also kind of feeling the same way. Evidence reveals that Black Star's clone may have been created by George or Skyfox, who we get to hear that had actually gone rogue from the Union because of the code. And so there's this kind of mystery about what's going on. The Utopian enlists Brandon to be a part of this autopsy and next procedures to kind of give him like a lesson for killing something, but it doesn't really turn out that way. Um, on the offside, Hutch, who we find out is actually Skyfox's son who was born without powers, and Chloe, Sheldon and Grace's daughter, start to become a couple on the low side. Um, Sheldon questions Hutch about his father, but doesn't know that Hutch is actually secretly seeing Chloe. We find out from Hutch that he doesn't know anything about his father, that his father disappeared, and that he'd really just like to see him too. And so Sheldon kind of tells Hutch that, there's no hard feelings. That's why he's turned a blind eye to Hutch being a thief, and that, they never betrayed George. But Hutch says that he doesn't know about that. He knows what his mother told him, and he believes in the truth. And it kind of leaves off at that. Lady Liberty finds out that during one of Chloe's stunts with drugs that she had ended up in the hospital, and she finds that out through one of the younger union members who ends up telling Lady Liberty, and Lady Liberty goes and visits her daughter and finds out that her daughter is actually secretly seeing Hutch, but she doesn't say anything and keeps it quiet. This like whole dynamic between Grace and Sheldon's really rocky right now because of the code. Grace is starting to feel like she's lost her voice because she used to be this great reporter and report on the facts, the hard truths. And I think she's starting to feel like she's taken a back seat to her own truth and her own knowledge of finding out things and just following along as the right hand of Sheldon, the utopian. And she's pretty much told that too by another member of the union. And she, is feeling like she really needs to kind of gear up and be herself and do things because she believes in them. So that causes a really big rift between her and Sheldon and a tension that's there. Sheldon starts feeling more and more alone on this whole code thing. He's not really sure how to handle it. He tries to get Grace to kind of be more on his side, but along the way he's realizing that he really is the isolated variable in this. He ends up visiting this crazy therapist who's a mad scientist in the Supermax, and the therapist pretty much dives into why the code would be important to Sheldon, and that really he finds out that the code might actually be his way of making other members of the union think of Sheldon and remember him and not abandon him like his father abandoned him. And so Sheldon kind of takes that idea and that thought process to heart as he kind of continues on to the present day. So we're thrown back into the past again, and Sheldon is on the boat with all of his friends, and he starts, of course, talking to his deceased father, who's a ghost that's been haunting him this whole time. They end up finding the last member that was sitting at the table. He was abandoned at sea. Apparently, he was going on the Blue Cross with I think it's a lover, but a friend. It's not really clear. Someone very close to this guy. And they find him, and his name's Richard Conrad. And Sheldon, it just like clicks in his brain, like, this is the last person. This was meant to be. This was in my vision. You know, this really means something. And all of a sudden, right after they get him, this Richard guy starts talking about the same crazy storm that Old Man Miller was talking about. How it was relentless, how it wouldn't stop. Every which way that they turned, it would follow them. And it was like it had a mind of its own, like it was its own entity coming after them and warding them away from whatever lay beneath. And it had taken their ship and lost everybody at the storm except for him. And just as he's finished relaying this, and it goes back and forth between Old Man Miller's voice and Richard's as like a unison. And Sheldon's just kind of like shell shocked listening to this. And right as Richard is finished saying this, the huge storm hits and starts up. Then, right before we can actually deal with any of that, we're thrown back into the present. Brandon's struggling with his morality of his actions. He feels like he should do the code, but at the same time, he doesn't regret saving his parents at all. And he's trying to talk with his mom about that. He's talking with Chloe about that. And he understands he's trying to just be the person his dad wants him to be. And at the same time, we have Grace who goes after this supervillain who ends up killing one of these bright young superheroes, and she goes in and beats this ghost beam pretty badly, and we start to think that Grace is actually going to kill this ghost beam for killing this young superhero girl. And as she's walking out, they ask what's going on, the police, and she says, well, get the coroner because she's dead. And then they ask about Ghostbeam, the supervillain. She says, no, well, I guess he gets to live. But it's kind of like this bell going off to where she did what her husband in the code wanted her to do, but she feels wrong about it. She feels kind of dead inside, and you really get the feeling of that through the screen. So then they have to deal with the fact that Black Star was a clone and figure out who made this extra Black Star and who started making this. There's kind of some suspicion thrown around that Skyfox might be up to something, that this might be like another supervillain. They're not really sure. So Grace tells Sheldon that they need to get Brainwave Walter to recruit Walter's daughter, Raikou, who is an assassin, to telepathically search Black Star's clone's brain using the Flare and Petra, the Flare's daughter's powers, to ignite what's left of the brain matter and bring it back to life so that Brainwave and Raikou could go in and see who created this clone of Blackstar, this crazy clone. Sheldon becomes pretty, still worried that this disinterest in the code is deteriorating the Union, and the fact that he's having to deal with two really tough choices. The choice of upholding the code and losing all the new superheroes that are going to replace, the Union who's getting older, pretty much by saying he doesn't care that they die to these supervillains, who these supervillains are killing them off like flies. I think about 5 or 6 of them died within the course of a couple episodes here, who's a pretty close timeline too. And then, or abandoning the code, abandoning his values, abandoning what the Union has stood for decades, and possibly having the Union crumble to his feet and lose power. So he's really having a hard time with this. Then we're thrown back to the past, and they all find out that Sheldon's completely kookaburra's crazy, and that, he's talking to his father's pushing him to do all this stuff. Walter pretty much says, hey, we gotta turn around. The ship's captain says, we gotta turn around. The storm's crazy. Sheldon gets a hold of a weapon and pretty much holds the entire boat hostage, telling them they have to go, they have to keep going, they have to push into the storm. There's no going back. It's in his vision. The ship's captain also is armed, and there's a standoff between who's going to live. And so Grace gets in between them and tells, you're better than this. You need to stop. You need to put it down. And as Grace is kind of talking some wisdom into Sheldon, Sheldon kind of realizes that's a test of their worthiness. And he puts down his weapon, causes the truth, lets go of control right there. And then all of a sudden, this crazy storm stops and there's clear sky. And then out of nowhere is this huge, ominous island that just appears out of nowhere. And everyone's kind of like awestruck because they all saw the island just appear. So they make it to the island and they all disembark. And there's a little bit of tension between George and Walter, and Walter and Sheldon, and there's a little bit of bickering, and Walter decides, he's had enough of this. He's gone this far. He's done. Forget you guys. I'm out. Turns around to leave, and this huge tree just pops up, blocking his path from the ground. A fully grown 60-foot tree out of nowhere just pops up out of the ground, and any direction he goes, these trees stop him. So it becomes really clear to the whole group that there is no going back. The only way is forward. They've been chosen. And so they go, they walk, they run into snow, they run into desert, all within the course of like a mile until they make it to this like mouth of this crazy cave. Sheldon and Walter kind of have a run in a little more. And Walter just says, why don't you listen to me? Why didn't you listen to me before? Dad would still be alive if you had listened. Everybody would be okay. Our business wouldn't have, you know, lost itself. And, Sheldon pretty much says sorry for that. There's no way that he could have predicted all that. And so, as they're kind of going through this cave, they kind of all get at each other's throats and they start acting up until one of them notices that all these, other chosens that are there, these dead skeletons and stuff like that, who are from the Viking area, the Bronze Age, Roman times, all are there, but they're all dead because they had killed each other. There's actually a spear through another one, and they said that, they need to come together as one. They can't be against each other, that this place is just pitting each other. And so they end up getting closed in by this cave more and more and more into this circle sphere. And the only thing that's you can see is this light. And they put their hands in the cave and it lights up in this beautiful pattern, this kind of alienate pattern. And as Walter and George put their hands together, they both nix out. The power leaves. And so they realize that they need to set their differences aside and come together. They do so, and then Walter and Sheldon's also does the same thing until, they come to a truth. They forgive each other, bygones, bygones. And then as they all light up, the the sphere opens up into this beautiful planet, and you realize that you're not on Earth anymore. You're on Jupiter, and this gorgeous tree is there. And as they go to this tree, they're each visited. At first, you see Sheldon and Walter's father, and Sheldon's like, "No, not again." And Walter's like, "Oh, it's okay. Like, I see him too." And their father's whole again. He doesn't have any splatter marks or anything. And and at the same time, the man that, Richard was in love with or for good friends with, he doesn't really tell you, but he's also there. And then for Grace, it looks like her brother who was lost in a war. And then for George, it's like that was the one that touched me the most, was actually his mother in kind of older Victorian clothes. And they say that, I love you and you guys are worthy when all else fails. And they're so happy to give this gift to them. And that's how they come back to the ship, and this, I guess right before that too, I should say, there's this great big blast, this subsonic blast where the ship was waiting for them, and it touches all the crew members' faces with this beautiful alienistic symbols. And then that's kind of like, for me, I was like wondering if these guys are the chosen ones, why are there so many other supervillains? Well, because the ship crew members were also touched by this light because they were so close to the chosen ones being given this power. So their descendants, I assume, were chosen in a way, kind of like not as powerful as the Union, obviously, but also chosen, and their descendants given this power as well. And that's when we see the Union all coming down with their capes and their beautiful superhero clothes and this white basking light. And so then we're thrown back into the present. Um, Blackstar, the real one, ends up escaping somehow from his cell, and Sheldon is forced to choose between his son or upholding the code because the real Blackstar ends up getting a hold of Brandon, and Sheldon hesitates for like a really long time to where, Blackstar's like, "I'm sorry, kid, I don't think he's picking you," and Brandon's just like, just shocked that his dad would not automatically pick him. And Fitz's daughter Petra distracts Blackstar long enough so Brandon can overpower Blackstar and viciously beats him, but stops right when he's about to uh, kill him once again, which was prompted by his father. Brandon's just kind of like in shock, and Sheldon's like, "Oh, I would have saved you," and Brandon's like, "Yeah, sure you would have," you know. As this is going on, this whole fight's going on, then we're brought back to Brainwave and Raikou, who are going into the clone of what's left of Blackstar's brain, with the flare holding open the passage. And then it becomes clear that this is actually a trap for Brainwave, and he gets stuck in this like crazy latex world, kind of can't breathe. He can barely move, his body's stretched. Raiku's holding the passageway open for her father to get out. Their relationship, I should really mention quickly that the relationship between Brainwave and his daughter is really strange. She actually asks for $1 million a day to help and doesn't want anything to do with him. So she's helping that one day, and she's trying to save him by keeping the connection open. Brainwave ends up making it through, but into this whole alternate reality where he sees a young George sitting there listening to a song, relaxing, before he turns into Skyfox, and they battle and battle and battle, and Brainwave's not like a powered superhero, like a strong superhero. So he gets pretty beaten pretty bad pretty quickly by George until Grace telepathically joins in and saves Walter and brings him out. And um, Walter pretty much tells the entire group that it was Skyfox that had done it. And right before all that too, they had found like this metal sphere inside of the clone with a replicant watch that belonged to Sheldon and Walter's father. So they think it's like a personal message to the brothers that Skyfox is returning. Though we don't really hear anything from Skyfox other than this mental battle between Walter that Grace later joins in. There's no actual Skyfox there. So it's kind of strange. And then once they escape, everything kind of quiets down. They realize that Skyfox is back. Everyone's got an answer. Um, Walter ends up going and confronting Raikou and tells her that she needs to keep his secrets, that he was actually the one that created the clone to Black Star, and let the real Black Star loose. And in order to tear down the Union, tear down his brother's hold on the control of the code, because either way, it's a lose-lose battle for Sheldon. Choose the younger superheroes, let the code slip, let the code stay, and then, it's just not good for him. There's no good choice in this. So Sheldon's pretty defeated at the end. He's at the, unison table. His eyes are downcast. He's feeling really heavy. And then there's Brainwave right behind him, just putting his hand on his shoulder, telling him everything's kind of going to be okay by him being there. And then we're kind of panned over to Brainwave still having this conversation with his daughter, saying, "No, you either join me and become with, we worked with this together, or that's it." And Raiku's like, "Well, you give me $50 million and I'll never mention it again." And just then that Brainwave's like, "Well, I could have taught you so much." And then he ends up killing his own daughter. And that's the end of the series. I felt like it was really left off on a huge cliffhanger. I kind of had a feeling that Brainwave was a bad guy from the start, just the way that he's so smug and seems really in control of everything that's going on while everybody else in the Union is just crumbling and confused. Even though the Flare doesn't have like a ton of speaking points and a ton of, screen time as much as the other couple main characters, he does seem visibly worried about what's going on with everything and the turmoil and his daughter being involved with the Union and what that means for her and her longevity. And all through this, Brainwave just seemed pretty cool and collected about all of it. And I almost feel like that whole, well, actually, we find out it is that whole show with Skyfox in the dead Black Star clone's brain was just a horse and pony show for Grace, pretty much to show her that Skyfox has plans to kill Brandon and Sheldon, and she's just like really wigged out about that. And we start to realize that, Walter, who's felt like he's always been a second fiddle to his youngest brother, has had enough of taking, you know, advice and direction from Sheldon, and he wants Sheldon out of the picture one way or another. And that is where we leave it. I think it's a really good show. I think it's kind of heavy in certain areas and a little confusing in others. Um, I'm interested to see what they're going to do with this. I know there's a graphic art novel series about it. There's actually a couple different books from it too. It's pretty long in the series. Um, I might have to pick that up and check it out. But I hope you like this, and if you have any other shows you think I might like to review, let me know in the comments. Thanks so much for joining me. Have a good night.